Iran entered the winter of 2025 under immense strain. Years of economic hardship had hollowed out daily life. Inflation surged, the national currency lost value, and ordinary Iranians struggled to afford food, fuel, and housing. Beneath the economic pain lay deeper frustrations, political stagnation, limited freedoms, and a sense that power remained distant from the people. When protests began, they were not sudden. They were the release of pressure that had been building for years. The first demonstrations emerged in late December 2025, triggered by rising prices and worsening living conditions. Shopkeepers closed their stalls. Workers walked off jobs. Students filled streets and campuses. What began as economic protests quickly transformed into something broader. Chants shifted from prices of power, from livelihoods to leadership. The protests spread rapidly across cities, towns, and rural areas. They crossed social, ethnic, and class lines. Young people led the crowds, but they were joined by older generations who had lived through revolution, war, and reform, and who felt history repeating itself. The Iranian government responded swiftly and forcefully. Security forces flooded the streets. Live ammunition, tear gas, and mass arrests were deployed to break the momentum. Entire neighborhoods were sealed off. Fear returned to public life. Soon after, the internet went dark. Communication lines were cut. Social media platforms disappeared. The blackout isolated protesters from one another and from the outside world, turning cities into islands of silence. Iran's leadership framed the unrest as a foreign plot, accusing external powers of inciting chaos and violence. Protesters were labeled enemies of the state. Harsh sentences and threats of execution followed, signaling that dissent would be met with zero tolerance. The human cost mounted quickly. Thousands were killed. Tens of thousands were detained. Families searched for missing loved ones with no answers. As images and reports slowly emerged despite censorship, the world took notice. The United States publicly voiced support for protesters, framing the unrest as a struggle for basic rights and dignity. American leaders condemned the crackdown and imposed new sanctions on Iranian officials and security institutions. The message was clear: repression would carry consequences. At the same time, U.S. officials walked a careful line, avoiding direct military escalation while increasing diplomatic and economic pressure. European governments expressed alarm at the violence and called for restraint, accountability, and the release of detainees. Statements emphasized human rights and international law. Discussions began about additional sanctions, though Europe remained cautious, wary of pushing the crisis toward regional instability. At the United Nations, Iran became the focus of urgent debate. Human rights bodies raised concerns about mass killings, arbitrary arrests, and the use of excessive force. Calls were made for independent investigations and international accountability. Iran rejected these efforts, insisting the crisis was an internal matter. Regional powers. Across the Middle East, responses were more restrained. Neighboring countries largely avoided public condemnation, urging stability and warning against outside interference. Many fear that instability in Iran could spill across borders and inflame already fragile regional dynamics. Russia and other allies. Russia and several other countries took a different stance, criticizing Western reactions and framing the protests as an internal Iranian issue. They warned against foreign pressure and interference, reinforcing geopolitical divisions over how unrest should be addressed. Outside Iran, protests erupted in solidarity. Iranian diaspora communities organized rallies in major cities around the world. Exiled activists and opposition figures called on governments to take stronger action, urging recognition of the protesters' demands and increased diplomatic pressure on Tehran. Social media, where accessible, became a battlefield of narratives, voices of resistance clashing with state-backed messaging and international political agendas. By early 2026, the streets inside Iran had grown quieter. But the silence did not mean resolution. It reflected exhaustion, fear, and the heavy cost of defiance. The grievances that sparked the protests remained unresolved. Economic hardship, political exclusion, and demands for dignity persisted beneath the surface. For the world, the Iran protest became a test of principles and power. Governments balance moral condemnation with strategic caution. Human rights clash with geopolitics. Words were spoken, sanctions imposed, but the limits of international influence were laid bare. The story of the Iran protests is not only about confrontation between citizens and the state. It is about society at a crossroads and a world watching, reacting, and struggling to decide how far it is willing to go in defense of change. Thank you for listening to this documentary. To listen to more of our content and discoveries on our YouTube channel, click the subscribe button, like and share. Watch out for our next content.